My name is Luke Fees. I'm 16 years old. Today is November 15th, 2018, and I'm speaking with Karen Johnson, who is my grandma. We are recording this interview in Morro Bay, California. Grandma, why don't you tell me the story of the Kalinga earthquake of May 2nd, 1982?
Okay. We were living in Kalinga in 1982. I was employed by West Hills College in that town, and your grandpa was employed by Shell Oil. Your mother was 2 years old, and her sister, your Aunt Liz, was 1 year old. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house, and we had just bought the house. We hadn't lived there very long. On May 2nd, I had work that day, but I took off work early because I had a 5 o'clock appointment downtown for a haircut. And your grandpa had gotten off at about 3:30, and he had gone for a walk and wasn't home yet. I was sitting in the front living room, and let me describe this living room to you. One entire wall of the living room, from floor to ceiling, was a big wooden library unit, and it had our television set and all the components to the television in it. Plus there were movies and books and just a huge whole wall of the room. All of a sudden, I felt a huge jolt, and the room and the house began to shake, and things were falling all over the place. Glass was breaking. And I looked over, I was sitting on the couch, and I looked over, and this entire wall of wooden shelving had come loose and was tipping toward me. I had just enough time to get up, run out the front door, and dive off the front porch. I got hit on the head by a piece of the roofing, which was a Spanish tile roof. And about that time, I saw your grandpa walking down the street. He was coming toward me. And the ground was still shaking, mind you. During all this time, everything was still shaking. It scared me to death. Then I looked over toward the center of town, and there was a huge billowing smoke, big black dark smoke coming from the center of town. The first thing that occurred to me was that my children were on the other side of town at the babysitter's, and we hadn't picked them up yet. And in order for me to pick them up, I needed my car keys. And so I had to go back inside the house, which I was terrified of, to get my car keys. Somehow I managed. Your grandpa and I got in the car, and we both headed across town to the babysitter's house. My heart sank as soon as we turned onto her street and I saw her house, because it was no longer on its foundation. It had come off the foundation. I jumped out of the car and ran over. I walked up the front steps to the house and had to reach down for the doorknob because the door, and it wouldn't open because it was blocked. So we had to go around to the other side of the house, and that's when I saw that Kathy, the babysitter, had your mom and Aunt Liz sitting out in the backyard with her, and she had 2 children. Her kids were sitting with them, and they were all safe. Everybody was fine. And she says, "But I want to show you where we wrote it out." So we went through the back door, and they had been in the kitchen, and when it started, they had a big kitchen table. She told all the kids to get under the kitchen table, which they did. And that's where they wrote it out. But when I looked in that kitchen and looked beyond into their living room, the floor looked like a roller coaster. There wasn't a single bit of floor that was straight and flat anymore. It looked like somebody had just taken it and crunched it up. And that was my experience with the Kalinga earthquake. Now, we didn't get back into our house for quite some time. In fact, we slept in the car for about 3 weeks because I would not go back into that house. Your Aunt Liz was very upset because the toilet in the bathroom had fallen completely through the floor. There was a big hole there where it used to be. And she cried because she was just getting potty trained. And it was all of a sudden gone from her life, and she was very upset. The first night we spent in a tent in the front yard of my sister's house. And I remember we had one of the big aftershocks, because we had lots of aftershocks for days and days. One of the big ones, I looked out and I saw a tree that was standing up straight, and during the earthquake, or the aftershock that happened, it bent over and nearly touched the ground and then came back, snapped back up. There was that much movement, that violent a movement in the ground. And that was also very disturbing. And of course, the news people had news reporters coming to town all the time. There was a man there with, I remember he had white hair, and he was a reporter for CBS News. And he actually interviewed your Aunt Liz. And he asked her what she thought of all of this going on. And she said, "Our house is a mess." And that was her contribution to CBS News. But yeah, that was the earthquake. And it took months and months to get everything fixed. We had to have our roof replaced. A lot of people lost their houses completely. We were lucky. Ours didn't even come off the foundation. But we did have some repairs to do. But we survived it. And it's very humbling when I think of the power of Mother Nature. You don't mess with Mother Nature. It's extremely humbling.
Thank you, Grandma.